I was standing in a place made of pure ancient light when Jesus pointed toward the horizon of the Middle East and showed me something that would make every news anchor in the world fall silent. He didn't show me a nuclear strike or a conventional war started by fighter jets. He showed me the streets of Tehran and Isfahan erupting into a sea of millions of young Iranians, turning their own weapons against their masters. It will not be by bombs, he told me with a voice that vibrated through my very soul, but by the spirit of the people I am awakening right now. I watched the iron gates of that regime crumble from the inside, fulfilling a divine plan set in motion thousands of years ago, long before the world even understood the word prophecy. To understand the weight of what I saw, you have to understand who I am. A man of scrolls and cold hard facts, not a man of visions. My name is Bernard Goldstein. I am 86 years old, and I spent my entire career as a professor of Jewish history at the University of Pennsylvania. I thought I knew exactly how the story of Israel would end until a massive stroke hit me during a Shabbat dinner in Haifa. My heart became a silent stone for exactly 16 minutes, and while my daughter-in-law was desperately pumping my chest, I was standing before the King of Kings. My academic credentials mean absolutely nothing compared to those minutes I spent behind the veil, witnessing the final hours of Jerusalem's prophetic clock. What I am about to reveal to you are 7 shocking events that Jesus burned into my soul, things that go far beyond the surface-level politics you see on the evening news. From the literal division of Lebanon to a divine shield appearing over Jerusalem, these are not guesses. They are the blueprints of what is coming to our world next. I believe you were led to this testimony today for a specific reason, so I ask you, if you saw a supernatural dome of protection over your city tomorrow, would you finally believe the end is near? Please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe and hit the notification bell now, because the message Jesus gave me is an urgent warning that every believer must hear. I know that witnessing the internal collapse of a regime like Iran sounds like an impossible fever dream, but you have to understand the mind of the man who saw it. For 40 years, my world was not defined by prophetic visions, but by the cold, hard weight of historical facts. As a professor of Jewish history at the University of Pennsylvania, I spent my long career tracing the diaspora and the ancient kings of Israel, leading the Beth Shalom congregation with a faith built on academic heritage rather than supernatural miracles. I was a man of logic, a widower who found comfort in the predictable rhythms of the Torah. I never expected that my own history would end so abruptly during a quiet Shabbat dinner in Haifa, just as I reached for the wine. The transition from a celebratory meal to the final moments of my life happened in the space of a single agonizing heartbeat. As my fingers touched the silver Kiddush cup, a violent thunderclap erupted inside my skull, a massive hemorrhagic stroke that shattered the room into 1,000 jagged gray pieces. I remember the sharp, metallic taste of blood in my mouth and the sudden, terrifying silence as my legs turned to water beneath me. I saw my son's face twist into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as I slipped from my chair toward the cold floor. My daughter-in-law, a surgeon trained for such crises, was already screaming for an ambulance while her hands began the rhythmic, brutal work of pounding against my chest. Suddenly, the ceiling of that dining room in Haifa was no longer above me. I was looking down at it from a height I could not explain. I felt a strange elastic snap as I separated from the heavy, broken shell of my 86-year-old body, leaving behind the weight of decades. I watched from the corner of the room, hovering near the ceiling, as the paramedics rushed in with their heavy bags and electronic defibrillators. I saw the beads of sweat on my daughter-in-law's forehead as she refused to stop the compressions, even when the heart monitor showed a flat emerald line. They told me later that my heart was a silent stone for exactly 16 minutes, a stretch of time where I was technically a corpse. The frantic sounds of the sirens and the desperate weeping of my family began to stretch and distort, like a radio station losing its signal in a storm. The walls of the house started to dissolve into a thick, swirling gray mist, and the bright Mediterranean sun was replaced by a pull that felt like a powerful celestial magnet. I was not afraid. Instead, I felt a cold, crystalline urgency as I was drawn into a tunnel of light that made the entire physical world seem like a dim, flickering shadow. The smells of the Shabbat candles and the hospital equipment vanished instantly, replaced by the scent of ancient cedar and rain. I was moving toward a boundary that no amount of historical research could have prepared me to cross. The pull was magnetic, a celestial force that felt more real than the air I had just stopped breathing in that dining room in Haifa. I transitioned instantly from the suffocating smell of hospital-grade adrenaline and burnt Shabbat candles to the crisp ancient scent of cedar and rain. I stood in a place of overwhelming living light, a brightness that didn't hurt my eyes but seemed to pulse with a temperature of pure peace. For the first time in 86 years, the chronic ache in my joints and the crushing weight of the stroke were gone, replaced by a lightness I can only compare to waking up from a long, feverish nightmare. Then he was simply there, standing in the center of the radiance. He didn't look like the pale, blue-eyed figures I had seen in the art history books at the university. He was a man of the Levant, a true son of Israel, with skin the color of deep-weathered bronze and eyes like dark, burning coals that seemed to hold the collective history of our people. The moment I looked at him, my academic pride vanished. My knees gave way, and I collapsed into a fit of sobbing I couldn't control. I didn't need a degree to know I was standing before the King of Kings, my Messiah, Yeshua. He didn't call me professor or rabbi. He reached down, touched my shoulder, and simply said, "Bernard." His voice wasn't a sound, but a vibration that resonated through my soul, calming the storm of my heart instantly. He smiled with a warmth that made the sun feel cold, and I knew right then that I wasn't in this place just to rest. "I have things to show you, Bernard," he told me. "Secrets about the land of your fathers that the world is not yet ready to hear." He beckoned me toward a shimmering horizon, promising to reveal 7 shocking events that would soon change the map of the world. Jesus moved his hand toward the eastern horizon, and suddenly the heavenly light shifted into a vivid panoramic display of the Middle East. I didn't see the flash of nuclear warheads or the smoke of Israeli fighter jets over Tehran, as I had spent decades analyzing in university journals. Instead, he showed me the streets of Isfahan and Shiraz erupting in a sea of millions of young Iranians, their faces lit not by fire but by a hunger for truth. I watched as the iron gates of the regime's bunkers literally crumbled from the inside, pulled down by the hands of the very people they once oppressed. It was a domestic revolution born of a divine awakening, shattering the power of the Ayatollahs without a single foreign boot touching the ground. I stood there, my academic mind trying to calculate the political logistics of such a collapse, but the sheer scale of the vision made my knees tremble. Jesus looked at me, his dark eyes reflecting the liberation of an entire nation, and he said, "Bernard, it will not be by the bombs of men, but by the Spirit I am pouring out upon the sons and daughters of Persia." His voice carried the weight of ancient authority, reminding me of the words in Isaiah regarding the breaking of the gates of brass. He was showing me that the greatest threat to Israel's enemies isn't a missile battery, but the sudden supernatural turning of their own citizens toward the light he provides. Then the vision shifted toward the northern border, where the green hills of Galilee met the jagged ridges of Lebanon. I saw a line being drawn directly through the soil, not with ink, but with a searing celestial fire that divided the land into 2 distinct nations. The southern portion of Lebanon was being transformed into a permanent security zone, overseen by the strength of Israel, to ensure that the children of the north could finally sleep without the sound of sirens. I watched the cedar trees of the high mountains bend as if under a heavy wind, while the shadow of Hezbollah began to evaporate like morning mist under a desert sun. The geopolitical map was being rewritten before my very eyes. As a historian, I knew the bloody history of those borders, but Jesus was showing me a restoration that went far beyond mere politics. He pointed to the specific mountain passes and said, "The pride of the forest is being stripped so that the land may finally breathe." I realized then that the words of Zechariah about Lebanon's doors being opened for fire were not just ancient poetry, but a tactical reality for our time. The spiritual corruption that had used that land as a shield for terror was being surgically removed by a divine hand. He was preparing the region for a peace that the United Nations could never negotiate, a peace built on the absolute sovereignty of the king. I was still reeling from the sight of a liberated Iran and a divided Lebanon when the atmosphere around us began to hum with an even more intense frequency. The first visions were staggering, but I could sense that Jesus was leading me toward the very heart of the conflict, toward the city where I had spent so much of my life studying. He turned his gaze toward the golden stones of Jerusalem, and the expression on his face changed from one of gentle instruction to a focused, leonine intensity. What he showed me next about the physical and spiritual protection of the holy city was what finally forced me to fall on my face in total shock. I was still processing the image of a divided Lebanon when Jesus turned my attention toward the golden stones of Jerusalem. The sky above Tel Aviv was suddenly streaked with hundreds of trails of fire, a massive barrage of missiles that looked like a rain of falling stars. But as the fire reached the outskirts of Jerusalem, it didn't explode against the buildings. It hit a shimmering, translucent canopy that looked like liquid diamond. It wasn't the Iron Dome technology I had studied in the news. It was a supernatural shield, a divine barrier that vibrated with a low celestial hum. I watched as the most advanced weapons of man simply evaporated against this invisible dome of protection. I looked at Jesus, my breath catching in my throat as I asked him why this city was being guarded by something so clearly not of this world. He turned his gaze toward the Temple Mount and said, "Bernard, Jerusalem is my footstool, and I will not allow the foot of the proud to crush it before the appointed hour." His voice carried the weight of 1,000 storms, yet it felt like a shield around my own heart. He explained that the nations would soon gather against this city, just as Zechariah warned, but their strength would mean nothing against the decree of the king who has already claimed the throne. Then he took me beneath the very foundations of the Temple Mount into a cold, dark chamber that had been sealed for thousands of years. In the center of the room, lit by a light that came from within the stones themselves, I saw golden vessels and ancient scrolls that looked as fresh as the day they were written. Jesus pointed to a specific foundation stone and told me that this discovery would soon be revealed to the world, proving the exact location of the Holy of Holies. "The stones themselves will cry out," he said, "and the world will no longer be able to deny that the time for my house to be rebuilt has arrived." The vision shifted again, taking us down to the white, salt-encrusted shores of the Dead Sea, a place I had visited many times as a young man. But instead of the stagnant, heavy water I remembered, I saw crystal-clear streams bubbling up directly from the desert floor. I watched in absolute silence as schools of silver fish leaped from the water, their scales catching the sunlight in a place where no life had existed for millennia. Jesus smiled at my confusion and whispered, "My restoration is not just for the borders of men, Bernard. It is for the very marrow of the earth. What was cursed is now being breathed back into life." Finally, he led me to the summit of the Mount of Olives, and I felt a vibration beneath my feet that made the very fabric of eternity shake. A massive earthquake tore through the limestone, and I watched with a mixture of terror and awe as the mountain literally split in two, creating a vast valley that stretched toward the eastern horizon. I fell to my knees, unable to look directly at the intensity of his presence as the ground groaned beneath us. Jesus looked down at the new valley and said, "This is the path I will walk when I return, and every eye will see the glory of the Father in this very place." The intensity of the vision began to pull at my spirit, and I realized that the time for my witness in this place of light was coming to an end. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, a touch that felt like liquid fire and pure peace all at once, and he looked directly into my soul. "Go back, Bernard," he told me with a voice that commanded the stars to stay in their orbits. "Tell them that the time of shadows is over, and tell my people to look up, for their redemption is drawing near." I felt the celestial light beginning to fade, replaced by the heavy, suffocating pressure of my physical body. Jesus looked at me with an intensity that held the weight of all eternity. "Go back, Bernard," he commanded. I felt a surge of resistance. I didn't want to leave that place of perfect peace. I begged him to stay, but he touched my hand and whispered, "They must know the clock has reached its final hour." Instantly, the light vanished. I was slammed back into my cold, heavy body with a brutal, painful shock. The agonizing sting of the adrenaline shot tore through me as clinical hospital air replaced the scent of celestial cedar. My eyes snapped open to find my daughter-in-law's tear-streaked face. "He's back," she sobbed, her voice a distant echo from the life I almost lost. I am telling you this because I have no more time for academic caution. Every shocking event Jesus showed me, the internal collapse of Iran, the division of Lebanon, and that supernatural shield over Jerusalem, is not just a possibility, it is a divine certainty. I have spent my life studying history, but I have seen our future with my own eyes. I was hesitant to share these revelations, fearing they would be dismissed, but the urgency in the Messiah's voice was too great to ignore. The promise I made has been kept. The map of what is coming has been revealed. We are living in the final seconds of the prophetic clock, and these events are warnings we can no longer ignore. If you are watching this and feeling deep confusion or fear about our world, please listen to what the King told me. To those who feel politically hopeless or trapped in religious traditions that offer no peace, Jesus has a message. Do not look at the news. Look at the ancient stones of Jerusalem. He told me his restoration is for the marrow of your soul, not just the borders of nations. If you feel something massive is approaching, you are not imagining it. You are sensing the frequency of his return. The guidance he gave me was simple. Prepare your heart and recognize that the King has already claimed his throne. There is no more time to be a spectator. I believe you are led to this testimony because the message Jesus gave me was meant for you. If this stirred your spirit, please subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss updates he told me to share. Like this video to help this reach those still in the dark, and share it with someone who needs to hear hope is coming. I want to hear from you in the comments. After seeing these events, do you believe the splitting of the Mount of Olives is closer than we think? Remember, the streets of Tehran are changing, and the Golden City is being guarded by hands we can't see. Stay alert, for the King is at the door.